So we are back in class, and we are going to start the book of First Chronicles. Now, at the end of the book of Second Kings, you may be tempted to think that this is the end of the story. The people of Judah have been carried into exile, and they will be there 70 years, many of whom will never see their homeland again. So the question you begin to ask yourself is this: what happened to the great covenant that God gave to Abraham? What happened to this? What happened to his covenant with Israel at Mount Sinai? What happened to his covenant with David? I thought he said that the house of David will reign forever. Now, in this current situation, Israel don't have land, they don't have a king, and they don't have the blessing promised in the Abrahamic covenant, as God's plan to redeem creation through Israel failed. As we wrestle with these questions, we need to look at them through the lenses of God's might. God is not confined to the land. The end of the nation of Israel in the promised land is not the end of God. God is at work even when men are not. These are the issues the book of First and Second Chronicles are going to be addressing. Now, in the book of First and Second Samuel, we see the beginning of the royal history. In First and Second Kings, we see the end of the royal history. And then in the book of First and Second Chronicles, we will see the review of the history of Israel dating back to Adam. Also of interest is to realize that First and Second Kings are written to the people of Israel at the beginning of Babylonian captivity, while First and Second Chronicles are written at the end of the Babylonian captivity. God has moved Cyrus, a pagan king, to let Israel go back to their land and rebuild and restore it to its former glory. Not many of them wanted to go back. So they were comfortably settled in Babylon. They had been there 70 years, and the thought of leaving to go restart their lives all over again in another place was overwhelming at the least. They did not want to go back to a destroyed nation. So God gives them Chronicle as a review of their history in the most positive way to assure them that the blessing that God had bestowed on them before they went into exile is still available to them. It opens up in First Chronicles with Adam and closes in Second Chronicles with the return from exile to rebuild the temple. So the book calls them back to the hope of a restored temple, the hope of a rebuilt city, the hope of a reformed worship, and the hope of a reunited people. So the book of Chronicles calls the people of Israel into hope. So First and Second Chronicles covers the same time period as Second Samuel, First Kings, and Second Kings. The difference is perspective. Second Samuel, First and Second Kings gives a political history of Israel and Judah and is written from a prophetic and moral viewpoint. And in First and Second Chronicle, it gives a religious history of the Davidic dynasty and are written from a priestly and spiritual point of view. And what is the purpose of these two books? So the book of First and Second Chronicles were originally one book and was written sometime after Judah began to return from the Babylonian exile in 538 BC. Now, it focuses mainly on the history of the southern kingdom of Judah. Remember, the northern kingdom's story ended when they went to Assyria in 722 BC. They also were not in the royal line of Judah and of David. The author of First and Second Chronicles will focus on David as the model of God's anointed king to show those returning from exile that if they walk in the ways of David, they will be blessed by God. To summarize all this in one sentence, First Chronicles was written to the returning exiles to remind them of their history, of God's promises, the consequences of sin, and God's promised future for the Jewish people. Let's jump in and take a closer look at 1 Chronicles. According to our textbooks, there are two major divisions. Chapter 1 to 9, showing the genealogies from Adam to David. And then chapter 10 to 2 Chronicles 2:9, talking about the ideal monarchy. So let's look at 1 Chronicles chapter 1 to 9, the genealogies. So these chapters record the most comprehensive chronological table in the Bible. It begins with several genealogies with special emphasis on David and King Solomon. The author then moves to the history of the United Kingdom under David, stressing David's deep interest in worship and his detailed plan for the construction of the temple, which will be built by his son Solomon. This genealogy is very important because it is telling the returning exiles that they are not slaves anymore. They are God's chosen people, and their lives are connected with the great patriarchs of old. That is why the author goes into great pains and great details to record the 9 chapters of genealogy in First Chronicles. As you read through the genealogies, you will see in chapter 1 the genealogies from Adam to Abraham and then Abraham to Jacob. In chapter 2, the genealogy from Jacob to David, and in chapter 3, genealogy from David to captivity. And then chapter 4 to 8, you will see the 12 tribes of Israel. And then chapter 9, you will see the remnants of Judah returning from exile. As you study the genealogies, pay close attention to David, because it is from him that the Messiah will come. Pay close attention to the tribe of Levi as well, since this is the tribe that will produce the priesthood of Israel. And finally, pay attention to the tribe of Benjamin, because it is through this tribe that Saul, the first king of Israel, will come from. And when the split happens, we're going to see that the tribe of Benjamin is going to stay with the tribe of Judah. They're going to be loyal to King David. So the author is very intentional to look back in order to look forward. He wants Israel to understand how their past was a big reason why they went into exile in the first place. So at the same time, it was not all bad. Looking back, you're tempted to think that everything was bad. But it is also to not just look back to what you have lost, but also at how God was faithful. When you look at your books on page 40, you will see that the ideal monarch on 1 Chronicles, the second part of this, 1 Chronicles 10 to 2 Chronicles chapter 9. So I want us to go through this slowly. So the first thing I want to look at is the rise of King David in 1 Chronicles chapter 10 to chapter 12. The author retells the story of David and all the other Israel's kings in a positive light. He leaves out the negative things that they did, and in a way turning them into models and portrait of the future kings they hoped for. So you won't see the negative things that King David did. For example, in the book of 1 Chronicles, you won't see the story of Bathsheba. After the death of Saul and his sons, David is anointed king by the elders of Israel. And then David will go and conquer Jerusalem. And this is recorded in chapter 11, verse 4 to 9. And then you're going to see a list of his mighty men recorded in 1 Chronicles 11:10 to chapter 12, verse 40. Next, we're going to look at 1 Chronicles chapter 13, chapter 17. And this, in your book, you're going to see the topic there is the ark comes to Jerusalem. In this section, great importance is placed on the Ark of the Covenant's relocation to Jerusalem from Kiryat Jearim in 1 Chronicles chapter 13 to chapter 16. The Ark of the Covenant was not merely a box. It was actually a place where God had chosen to reside among his people. So David's desire to bring the ark back to Jerusalem showed his concern that God would dwell among his people. And if you look at Exodus chapter 25 verse 8, it says this, "Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them." Chapter 17 talks about the Davidic Covenant. This is important because it is a reminder of the returning exiles that David's family would be the avenue that God was going to use to bring salvation and blessing to Israel and through them to the rest of the world. Now, the Davidic Covenant is so important that the author refers to it 7 times in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. And you're going to see this in chapter 17, verse 11 to 14, chapter 22, verse 8 to 13, chapter 28, 6 to 7, and 2nd Chronicles 7, 17 to 18, 2nd Chronicles 13, verse 5, and then 2nd Chronicles 21, verse 7. That is a summary of 1st Chronicles 13 to 17. So you'll see the ark coming to Jerusalem, and then you will see the Davidic Covenant. And you can read that to understand more about it. So then 18 to 21, we see David's military victory. So in this section, we will see David's many military battles. David defeated the Philistines, the Moabites, the king of Aramean, and the Edomites. These are battles that Israel should not have won, but they won them because God was with them. And in this, God gave them amazing victory. So we see in these battles that God was fighting for David and for Israel. In this section, we also see that Satan led David to count the Israelites in chapter 21. God was not happy with him. As a result, he sent a plague, and a destroying angel came and killed 70,000 men on that day. So on that day, 70,000 men lost their lives. David bought Onan's or Araunah's field and made an offering, and the plague stopped. So in chapter 22 to 27, we're going to see the preparation of the temple. Now, remember we had in chapter 13 to 17, we saw the ark come to Jerusalem. In 18 to 21, we see David's military victory. And now in 22 to 27, we're going to see preparation for the temple. So David told Solomon, "The Lord has said that you will build his temple." This is great faith on David's part. He believed that the Lord would fulfill those things that he promised, even though he's going to be gone by the time these promises are fulfilled. So in this section, we see David preparing his son Solomon and also the nation of Israel as a whole for the great task of building the temple of God. He could not do this because God said in 1 Chronicles 22:8 that he had shed too much blood in war. So he prepares the nation of Israel in 2 ways. First, he does it by gathering the material for construction of the temple in chapter 22. And then secondly, he also does this by appointing people who would guide Israel after his death in 23 to 27. So in 23-26, we're going to see the organization of the Levites. So in 23, verse 1 and 2, we're going to see the reign of King Solomon beginning. And then we're going to see in 23, 3 to 6, we're going to see the Levitical offices. And then in 23, 7 to 11, we're going to see the Gershonites. In 23, 12 to 20, we're going to see the Kohathites. And then in 23, 21, 23, we're going to see the Merarites. and then we're going to see their duties in 23, 24, and 32, and then in 24, we're going to see the Levitical divisions, and then in 25, we're going to see the organization of the musicians, the division of the gatekeeper in 26, 1 to 19, the keepers of the treasure of the temple in 26 to 28, 20, 28, and then finally in 26, 29, 32, we're going to see the officers and judges outside of Israel. In chapter 27, we're going to see the organization of the nation. 27, 1 to 15, we're going to see the commanders of the army, and then chief tribal leaders in 27, 16 to 24, and then we're going to see the various overseers in 27, 25 to 34. And then the last section here is chapter 28, 29, we're going to see David's last days. So in chapter 28, we're going to see David's address concerning the temple of God. In 29, verse 1 to 9, we're going to see David's offering for the temple. And then 29, 10 to 20, we're going to see David's prayer. And then in 29, 21 to 25, we're going to see Solomon's coronation. And then 29, 26 to 30, we're going to see David's death. David praised God in prayer and concluded with these words: O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our Father, keep this forever in the intent of the thoughts of the hearts of your people, and fix their hearts towards you. 1 Chronicles 29, verse 18. What a way to go. Even in his dying breath, all he could think about was his God and his people's dedication to this God. This is my prayer for us as well, that the intent of the thoughts of our hearts will be fixed towards God. What a book. I hope you enjoyed learning it as much as I enjoyed teaching it. So see you in the next class as we handle the book of 2 Chronicles.